Well, welcome to our Fireside chat. Let's get started. I'm really excited for our discussion. And so, Danny, thank you so much. Welcome and welcome to everybody. I am Shivani. I am the CEO and founder of Ascend. We offer online leadership programs for women. And really what inspired me to start Ascend and host these Fireside chats was my own experience. I used to run and lead different product and business initiatives at large companies like PayPal and high growth startups. And as I was moving into leadership, I learned how to lead and get buy-in by honestly making a lot of mistakes. Some guidance, but primarily a lot of mistakes. And so I started to create the leadership program that I wish I had access to. And now we've had women from companies including Facebook, LinkedIn, Salesforce, Peloton, and many more coming out of it feeling much more confident, being able to consistently get buy-in from stakeholders, including dominant personalities, and really growing their careers, and including getting promoted much faster. And so much of our learnings comes from senior leaders who helped us curate the program. I really think we need to have more open and honest conversations around what it takes to move into management. And a big part of that is getting to learn from inspiring, successful women leaders. And that's why we host these fireside chats. I am so excited to have Dannie join us. Welcome, Dannie. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me. I'm really honored to be here, and I love what you're building here. I wish I had this, 10 years ago, 13 years ago in my career, and I'm really glad that you're sharing all of this with other folks.
Thanks so much for the kind words. I'm excited for our conversation. Dannie and I met a couple of years ago when she moved to San Francisco from Boston. And when I met her, I was instantaneously just blown away by her. Her energy, her charm, her sheer intelligence just blew me away. And I knew I wanted to have her come join us on this fireside chat. She is just an incredible leader, and I think we have a lot we can learn from her. So just a quick background on her before we dive in. Dannie is the head of enterprise sales at Slack. She has grown very quickly and moved up very quickly within the company and now leads a large sales team. And prior to that, she was at HubSpot, where she joined the company when it was only 150 employees. And she saw the company through it growing to 1,500 employees in its IPO. So she's a lot of great experience and she's been through a lot. And she also has an MBA from Stanford. So Dannie, let's just dive in and get real. I think when most people look at your achievements, they think, wow, she's got it all together. Like, she must be so confident, like just crushing it. So can you share with us, do you ever feel like an imposter? And if so, how do you manage that self-doubt?
Never. I'm living life, I'm crushing it. No, I'm just kidding. Well, I guess mistake number one, which I have to remind myself all the time, is that a resume doesn't tell the whole story or even a really big chunk of the story. And there are many moments where I feel really confident, and I love that and I own that. And it's such a joy when when I can recognize it and say, like, yeah, I'm the right person for this job, or I'm not the smartest person in the room, but I'm really well equipped to figure this out. So there are moments where I don't have the imposter syndrome, and I just feel qualified and eager to dig in or happy with the way I behaved. None of those moments come from looking at a resume or any checkboxes. Those are kind of little signals we give the world to say, I'm a de-risked bet to talk to or hire or something else, but they're not deep. And frankly, sometimes that shortcut to helping interpret someone's aptitude or capacity is not properly reflected in your LinkedIn profile or your resume, where you're doing your best to tell a really thoughtful story in hindsight or puff your chest, but it doesn't tell the whole story. So thank you, I think, for the really nice things you were saying. But when I think about my internal sense of confidence, it really comes from when I'm proud of the person who I am, and when I'm generally just feel like I'm doing the right thing. And I have a couple of hacks when I'm feeling particularly insecure or feeling a true sense of imposter syndrome, which we'll get into, that help bring me to that more confident place a little bit faster than I've been able to go before.
Got it. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I would love to hear your hacks.
Well, let me tell you moments I've felt imposter syndrome, because so far I've just told you sometimes I feel confident, it feels real good. But I feel imposter syndrome often, and I feel it professionally, I feel it socially, I feel it academically. And frankly, I would be concerned if I didn't, because it would mean I'm putting myself in a position where I can act and feel like the smartest person in the room. And it's very rare that that's the case. So I first remember feeling it most acutely when I got into undergrad, and I had gone from being, relatively speaking, top of the class in high school to these huge lecture halls where everyone's from the top of their class. And, I'm not the person to shoot my hand up in a lecture call and, cut off the professor before they finish asking the question, already have the answer framed in 3 bullet points and sound really smart. Like that's not me. And at first I was really, really impressed and intimidated by people like that. And so it took me a while. I was young, I was 18 when I started undergrad. And I hadn't had a lot of practice combating imposter syndrome then. So I actually didn't have any tactics at that point. Time just fixed everything, developing friendships, understanding that people still come to me asking questions, but they're different topics they do or don't ask me questions around. So like that's kind of how I started working through it. And I got some confidence that time heals all. You just like when there are very few data points about you, you care what people think. That's often when you have imposter syndrome. And so I felt that at business school. I felt that at HubSpot. I felt a cousin to imposter syndrome, let's say, when I first joined Slack. And I think there's a handful of Slack people on the line right now. So I don't know who I've talked about this with, but when I joined Slack for the first 6 months, it was a really, what would I say? It wasn't a harsh awakening, but I went from HubSpot as my last career data point where I'd spent almost 6 years. I essentially grew up with the company. And I went from being, like unexpectedly good up and comer seller to manager, et cetera, to leader. And so I had all this credibility and longevity that allowed people to trust me. I get to Slack, I step immediately into a leadership position, but there's no reason that anyone should trust me or think I'm qualified for the role, aside from maybe looking at the resume, which only tells a part of the story. So I was so eager for a silver bullet to say, like, can we just fast forward to the part where you guys know that I'm going to execute, I'm going to invest in people, I'm going to be the leader who you need me to be and stretch all of you as well, and just like skip over everything else. And I wanted that with my peers, and I wanted that with the executive team and with Stuart. And, you already know the punchline, which is there is no silver bullet. But the way that I approached it was invest in deep relationships with people, build trust and reliability by taking on little things and making people's life a little bit easier, show them who I really am and don't try to fake who I'm not. And the rest kind of just comes. So for me, the ramp was at least 6 months before I was like breathing easy, making making jokes, asking questions without hesitation. And it just takes a little bit of time.
I love your honesty right there. Imposter syndrome is a big topic we talk about in the leadership program, and often it's feeling an imposter because we're new to our role, whether we just got promoted to management or we just joined a new company. And so I'm sure your example really resonates with a lot of people. I know it definitely clicks with me because I felt the same way. And thanks for sharing those practical tips that have helped you feel more confident in those moments.
Can I share one more from my dad?
Yeah, definitely.
He taught me this one. I think I was a management consultant at the time, and I emailed him at 2 a.m. during like an all-nighter, and lots of stuff on my mind. And he always reminds me when I'm feeling insecure or down, the best and fastest way to address that is to spend all my energy on other people outside of myself. Because like you're in your own head when you feel like an imposter. You think you're the center of the universe. You think everyone is looking at you, doubting you. And so, my tactic for much of my life was, let me call my grandma. Let me do something unexpected that would make her happy. Let me spend a Saturday volunteering. And so that would be my suggestion to everyone here is like, can you do something bigger than yourself? And then at least, you're living your eulogy, not your resume. Like it's who you are. It's not the check boxes on your resume. And suddenly you can get confidence just by the way you behave, not the way you pontificate in a group or the way you execute at work.
Yeah, I love that. Go dad. That's a great tip. And
Yeah.
easy to do also, which is really nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Before we jump into the next question, I wanted to share with everyone, Danny and I will like talk about a lot of topics that I know all of us have on our minds. And so we're going to chat for about the next 20 to 30 minutes, and then we'll take questions from all of you. So feel free to add any questions you have by clicking on the Q&A icon that's at the bottom right of your Zoom screen. And you can add questions or upvote ones that you really want her to answer. And so bottom right of your screen, the Q&A icon. You can add questions there. So Danny, let's talk about your leadership experience now. When we first shared the event, I was blown away by the excitement, the enthusiasm that your Slack colleagues had. I think it really showed me how great of a leader you are, how much you do truly invest in building these relationships. And at the same time, you are really good at getting things done. I mean, that's demonstrated by your recent promotion to head of enterprise sales. That's huge.
Thank you.
And so can you share with us like how you think about this? And the reason I ask this is something really important, and it's a big struggle that often comes up in the leadership program. The members often ask, like, how do I balance being direct and getting things done with likability? And so what are the strategies that you use to balance this tension?
Okay, let's address all parts of that. The first part was, Slack enthusiasm. I don't attribute that to my leadership at all, although I really like that spin on it. Thank you. But that to me is attributable to Slack's culture and who we've been able to attract and how we operate together. Like I think our culture is so much more about shining the spotlight on others and genuinely rooting for each other. I'm feeling it, it's our end of fiscal year right now. And I don't think people get more joy out of closing their own deal than they necessarily do seeing a colleague, really show up and deliver a deal that's meaningful to them. So like that's just the only work environment I want to be part of. And that's what I attribute it to.
I love that.
In terms of my leadership style and radical candor and what it means to balance what you said, directness and likability.
Yep.
I have a couple thoughts on it. I would say number two. So number one, my approach to building relationships at a company is that like life is too short not to. So there's no tit for tat. There's no, I need to do this so that I can ask a hard thing later. And I'm probably going to need a favor from them a month ago. So I'll butter them up. Like, no, this is how I'm spending most of my waking hours. Even when I'm offline, it's a lot of my thoughts, a lot of my conversations with my husband have to do with work and people dynamics at work. And so just to love the life I'm living, I invest in building connections. And what I noticed at Slack when I first joined is sometimes that's startling or uncomfortable to people because I'm very happy if we spend our first meeting spending 45 minutes on rapport and just getting to know each other as people. And I know the rest will come later where, we have to execute, we have to work through a hard thing, they have to figure out how they can help me, how I help them. But I would say invest, and life is too short not to. The likability and directness part, I really don't see those as opposing forces at all. I think likability and directness are correlated, not opposite ends of one spectrum. And when I think back to who's had a really positive and productive influence on me as a person or on my career, it's people who speak up and tell me when I did something that didn't resonate with them or hurt their feelings or just, was a bad decision, a bad interpretation of data. So that's kind of my framework for how I interact with people. I think I'm known as extremely direct. I take pride in that. I don't see that as like harsh or cold-hearted. Do I ever, there's sometimes, especially when I'm in a rush, actually, sometimes this happens on Slack. If I'm firing something off and I forget to greet someone or, you don't have like the preamble of a live conversation, I go back in my head and I'm like, was that too harsh? Did they interpret that right? Did I just ruin their whole day? And that's a reality that I face all the time. Usually what I do is I pick up the phone and I call someone and I first just apologize. And I'm like, was that harsh? I'm sorry. Here's the spirit of what I wanted to say. So you can always correct. But that does come up. But I don't overthink it. And then the last thing is, especially when I'm giving feedback to someone, the easier route is always not to give constructive feedback. Like, it feels good to give positive feedback. It feels fine to bite your tongue. And it is hard. And I require prep to give constructive feedback to someone in a really direct way. What I ask myself to feel that, to feel confident that it's worthwhile is, whom is the direct comment going to serve? Um, so is it there to serve me? Is it there to serve the person? Is it there to serve the company? Is it there to serve the customer? And as long as the answer is that it's there to serve someone beyond me, I feel really good about it. And the way that tell me if this is too long of an answer, but
Oh,
like
right.
my approach is someone, if you work with me and you've never gotten constructive feedback from me, that's a red flag. That's a red flag in my leadership, and that's a red flag in my investment in you, frankly, because I usually preface conversations this way, but it's like, I'm going to give you hard, direct feedback right now. And I'm going to give it to you because you have so much potential. And I know you're the kind of person who's going to hear it, implement it, and grow. And so that is the spirit behind doing the harder thing of giving direct and constructive feedback. And that's how you should interpret it. Not in the moment. In the moment, you can feel defensive and emotional and all the things, but like a day later when you're processing, if someone said something hard or direct to you, the right way to interpret it is, I'm worth saying that to. They think I'm resilient enough. They think I can change. They think I have potential.
Yeah, I love that. I 100% agree with that. Often when we hold back on giving hard feedback, if you really dig into it, it's really about like, we don't want to be in the uncomfortable position. Because like you said, if you give that person the feedback, they're going to grow.
Mm-hmm.
And, as we talk about like this, like likability versus directness, big question that comes up is around like in the leadership program, are the women asking like, how do I balance being nice versus direct? And I often pose a question back to them, like, why is that a conflict with each other? You can be quote unquote nice and direct at the same time and focus on getting things done. And like you said, it's really focusing on building the relationships with people and being clear on the goals and to help things move forward.
And that's the essence, that radical candor concept that you brought up. I think that's the essence of it. The essence is, invest in the relationships that it's genuine and you're saying it because you care for the person and believe in them. And then just say the thing. Don't beat around the bush. No one likes the preamble. It doesn't actually soften the blow. So just say it, and people will come to expect it from you and appreciate, then if you give them a compliment at some point, it's valid. Like they know it counts because you've been direct in other ways.
Yeah, definitely. And they trust you more because they know that you're not hiding something, you're not being manipulative around it, which is right. Really powerful and of course really important. And as we talk about these relationships, is there anything else that you would add as you try to drive alignment with cross-functional partners? Just because collaboration with other teams is such a big part for most of us of our roles to be successful. So anything else you would add there too that you use to drive alignment with these cross-functional partners?
With cross-functional partners, it's an extension of what I was just talking about with directness. Invest in the person first. They are a person. If they're cranky with you, it's because something else is going on. So like that doesn't have to play out in your dynamic. You also don't have to ask them what else is going on. You just remember they are a person. And build the friendship if you're compatible there. I would say the second part comes from advice I got from a business school professor. I called him when I first started Slack and said, like, what's my silver bullet for earning trust and credibility? It was that imposter syndrome cousin. And what he said is, if you just take every meeting and listen and don't make it about you, so do not request in the early days. It's not, how can you help me? It's, what am I hearing from you and how can I help you? That will make you stand out by comparison to 99% of the people who that person is meeting with that day. So that's a big one. Seek to understand. So Stuart, our CEO, had everyone on the senior leadership team read a book a couple of years ago that was called Leadership and Self-Deception. And the general idea was like, if you're rushed or you're in a bad place, sales may look at marketing and say, marketing, what have you done for me lately? Oh, if I were there, I would have had so many leads, and all functions do this with each other because we only know our own world and we're less empathetic to the other world. And so my takeaway from that was seek to understand, put myself in someone else's shoes, and then create win-win scenarios when working cross-functionally. And lastly, invite feedback and circle back when you action on it to show that they can influence you.
Those are great tips and so well aligned with what we talk about in the program around like co-creation, like how do you get people invested in your ideas? And you're right, it's about building that relationship and helping people understand that it's not just, you're not in it for your own gain, but how we all can win in it together, especially when we're working in a company context. We are working towards the same goals, just from different angles around it.
Yeah. There's one more concept. Actually, I was in this, it was a women's group orchestrated by a couple of amazing women who are go-to-market leaders and board members. And they introduced this concept of do the job that's not your job. And what they meant there is, sometimes it makes sense to stay in your swim lane, but if you're not out there getting to know your cross-functional partners and building those relationships, you're actually missing a core element that's going to be really important for your career. And so I would actually, regardless of what your role is here, I'd find ways to build relationships with people outside of your organization. And those lead to unexpected pathways that you can't expect for how your career unfolds. So I used to do a walk and talk with Brad Coffey, who's now chief strategy officer at HubSpot. He was something like VP of Corp Dev at the time, became head of product. And we would, I'd give him sales perspective on pricing. He'd give me, corp dev perspective on whatever we were thinking through strategy. And it was like totally mutual, no agenda, literally just an hour-long walk and talk once a month. And lo and behold, 6 months later, CEO ended up moving me to work in the product org under Brad as he became the VP of product. And our relationship that had no agenda, I wasn't like maneuvering and planting seeds, that just allowed me to step into the role and have so much fun in this unexpected place because of this relationship I built while I was still an IC.
That's so important. I've had similar experiences where organic relationships I've built, people got to know what I was bringing to the table, and they saw also, so like they knew I was in it for the team and not for myself, and that helped me. I'd say that's the biggest factor that's helped me grow faster in my career and like have more meaningful roles. So that really resonates. Switching gears a bit, let's talk about the combination of personal and work life. And so you became a mom earlier this year to a beautiful baby daughter, Sadie. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And, I love to chat about, like, as women, often we talk about, work-life balance is a big topic. We never ask male leaders about work-life balance. And so we're not going to do that either here today. I'd love to hear how becoming a mom has helped you grow in your career. How has it been an inflection point for you?
Best question ever. First of all, I love that you're not asking me about work-life balance, not just because that question is only directed at women 99% of the time, but also because I spend literally zero time thinking about work-life balance. It's just, that's not, it's like the likability and directness thing. Like, I don't think about work and life as mutually exclusive or opposing forces. Work is a very core part of my life and my identity. Family is a very core part of my life. Friends are a very core part of my life. And I see these three pillars intermingling, and like I don't really see them as direct trade-offs to one another. So great question, or great preface. Question is, how did this being a mom propel my career? I don't know that it has, but it has really had a positive influence on me. So let me explain. I think being a mom helped me actually be a better leader to people on my team. My biggest insecurity when I got pregnant with Sadie was, am I going to displace a burden, or am I going to place a burden on people who are filling in for me when I'm on maternity leave because I leave? And first of all, it's a very Danny-centric way of thinking in the universe. Like, how could they possibly function without me there for, for 4 months, God forbid. And I did seriously carry a lot of guilt from that. But what I actually learned is that it was really productive for the company and for other people's careers. So company-wise, what you do when you're planning for parental leave, regardless of your gender, is you zoom out, you make a plan, you zoom out, and you say, what's core to my role and my responsibilities? You have to put that into 3 buckets. You start thinking about, where am I making important decisions? What informs those? How do I contribute to the company? And you basically have this excuse to zoom out and figure out what your role really is and what it's going to need to be over the next quarter or so, however long you're taking. So that's a healthy exercise. Then part 2, think about, if you're in a leadership role, all the people who report to you, you can think about it as a burden, like, what am I going to need to delegate? Or you can think about it as a gift, which is like, all of these people are going to have so much more executive exposure. They're going to step into stretch assignments, and they are going to try on a new role for size, essentially, and see what they're good at and get a chance to prove themselves there. So that, and like, and as I'm reflecting, I think about the way I approached my maternity leave when I had Sadie was, different people do different parts of my job. So what I thought about a lot was like, what's each person of my team's strength or superpower, and what should they own? What should they be the spokesperson for? And that's like it's a great reflection to have. So did it propel my career? Did it change my career? I don't know, but I think it put, like, let's use Kim as an example. Many people know Kim here, who are on from Slack, but there's one woman on the leadership team who took over forecasting responsibilities and, represented the commercial org's QBR in my absence. She did such a good job. I mean, she did a way better job than I did on all those fronts, to the point where ops people were like, yeah, you sure you don't want us to keep working with Kim? So I came back feeling really good about that. And she, not long after, moved into an L2 leadership role, managing managers. And I don't know if one was causal for the other, but it was a really good preparation for that. So that's how you should think about parental leave, and how you leave the company better than how it was before you started expecting.
Wow, this resonates. I love this. And from the chat, I can tell a lot of other people are also loving what you're sharing and finding it really valuable. For my husband and I are planning to start a family soon. And to be honest, like, I am super excited to becoming a mom and really, really excited about that part of my life. But like you, a core part of my identity is also my career. I love building Ascend. And if I, like full candor, I think I sometimes have a bit of guilt of how much I love my career and how much I love Ascend. And if I'm rational, I know that that love and my passion for my work does not take away from my ability to be the mom that my child will deserve. But I just get cut off my own head often. And so hearing how you articulated your experience, honestly, like, this is probably like the best way that I've ever heard anyone say that, is really comforting to me and enlightening to me. And I imagine for so many other people who are listening on this. So thank you so much for sharing that.
You're going to be such a good parent. And there's no convenient time to do that family. You're not like, oh yeah, things feel really calm. I really, I really want to change my entire life as I've known it for 3+ decades. But you're already being so reflective about it. And I think, what better thing can we model for our children than passion about whatever we've decided to do? So I look at stay-at-home parents and I think they are incredible, because I could never, ever do that. Like, I was, 2 weeks between jobs and I nearly went crazy. I'm better when my plate is full of stuff. Not everyone is. And so you'll figure out what's right for you. One part that was interesting for me, even when coming back, was understanding, like, especially seeing a lot of my friends have kids and have different priorities. I thought about what matters to me in terms of my bond with Sadie. Some of it was pride and showing her what 2 ambitious working parents look like, and how we interact, and how we get joy and fulfillment out of things beyond her, even though she is our number 1 priority. I mean, Jake, my husband, and Sadie. kind of tied, I guess, for number one priority. But number one priority doesn't mean most important thing or only thing that I spend time and energy on. And my in-laws have actually modeled this really well. Like, there's no world where anything is more important than their sons and now their daughter-in-laws, but they have plenty of hobbies. They volunteer, they work out, they run a business together, and you're actually a better parent if you're not like, if you're not living vicariously through your child, putting 100% of your energy, and you get your joy from other places too. So I'm all about the like quality over quantity thing. Be present when I'm with Sadie, and no phone out, make silly noises, crawl around, play. And then when I'm not there, I don't have the mom guilt thing. I know that's a real thing. I don't have the mom guilt thing. I'm like, yeah, she probably wants me to be happy. She'll be pleased that I'm, stepping into the enterprise role right now rather than spending an extra hour with her.
Yeah, that is really refreshing. And, I know there's so many different perspectives and nothing's wrong or right. And it's really refreshing just to hear how you think about it. And that's something that really resonates with me. So thank you for sharing that. And,
Thank you
as
for
we,
sharing yours too. I mean, it's really lots of people listening are probably in the same boat where it's like, you and your partner are talking about it and you're thinking, is now the time and what will I have to sacrifice? And so it's a very relatable thought process to me.
yeah, definitely. Thanks for that. And, as we jump into our last question, we'll do that and then we'll take questions from all of you. So reminder, if you have questions, drop it into the Q&A icon that's on the bottom right of your screen. Upvote anything you really want Danny to answer. And so Danny, to wrap up like this portion of our chat, let's talk about failures because we often celebrate successes, but in reality, there's a lot of failures behind every single success. So can you share a failure that you've had in your career and what you've learned from it?
Yeah, I think the trick is to think about how we define failure. So, and when I've failed, I usually think about it as like moments I've been rejected, whether I wanted something or not, just moments where someone didn't see me as the most qualified individual. I felt some sense of failure in those moments. Um, when I have the wisdom or like maybe a cool down day to reinterpret it, it always teaches you something. And the trick is just kind of get in a better and better position to figure out what it's teaching you and learn the lessons faster and faster. So that's what I'm working on every time I inevitably face some sense of failure or rejection. By the way, if I'm not failing or being rejected, it means I'm not putting myself out there at all. So, your career can progress quite comfortably, but it's going to be linear, not exponential curve if you're not boldly putting yourself out there for something that may not be yours for the taking in a very obvious way. Okay, so that's all the preamble. You want to talk through times I've failed? Should we go through some of the examples?
Anytime, up to you, however you want to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I have lots of examples. So let's take one of the harshest ones. This one was hard to spin in the moment. When I was a management consultant, I had the CEO pull me into his office at some point and basically quiz me. I think he intended to fire me, but it was like the lead up. He said something to me like, I need you to be, I need to see your intellectual curiosity about something. And I left that meeting shaking because, I was an A student and I'm not used to not being great at something. What it showed me was he was asking a really good question. I had zero intellectual curiosity about industrial manufacturing and distribution strategy for wastewater pumps. That's what I was consulting on. And so he wasn't saying, Danny, you're not smart, you're not capable, but he was saying this job requires excitement about the topic we're digging into. And that was my signal. That was actually when I started looking for other jobs. It wasn't out of a place of fear, but it was out of someone asking me a hard question, pointing out that I'm probably not performing as well as I could. That was one. I applied. I have lots, so you cut me off. There's one I applied for a role. No, a woman at HubSpot who was my manager, who's awesome, really believed in me. We had a great dynamic. She tapped me for a division we were about to start and said, I want you to start this division. And it was a year into my tenure. And I was so honored. I came to like what I thought was not even an interview, but just like a chat about it, and felt really confident. And soon after, I learned that she gave the job to someone else, um, who's really capable and really great guy. Um, and I just felt so crushed. What happened a month later is I ended up, someone else tapped me to help build the channel program. Pete Caputo became a mentor to me. And that channel program became 40% of our revenue. All the reps who were in it and managers were in it were at the helm of the company, basically. And had I not been rejected from the first role, I would have never been able to explore the second role. So while it stung and I wanted everyone to love me and everyone to want me, um, I keep thinking about that HubSpot rejection. It's like 10 years ago, but I always think about it where I'm like, I would have never been able to walk through the other door if I had just gone through the first one. And so like it's less about wanting a yes from everyone and more about knowing you don't even know what the future holds if you don't do this. So when I was applying to business school, I don't know how you did this, Shivani, but that was part of my mentality where I said, if I don't get in, I'm positive that's the right thing. So I'm going to give it my all. I'm not too cool for it. I'm not going to pretend I don't want it. But if for whatever reason fate says Dannie is not meant to go to Stanford, that's okay, because you know what? I would have joined Slack 2 years earlier and I would have said, thank God I joined at this phase, not that phase. So think about it that way when you get rejected or you're failing.
I love that. You're much more mature than I am. When I was applying to business school, I was like, if I don't get into like Harvard, then that means like my career plan is totally falling out the window. No, in hindsight, like, yes, I did go there, but like I just realized like there are so many different paths your career can take. And how you're talking about how your rejection experience has shaped a lot of your career. The same thing happened to me when, one of my biggest mistakes I've made is around getting buy-in, like building relationships with people. And I understood like, wow, I'm very like focused on just getting things done, and I need to invest more time in that relationship building. And it made me realize like a bunch of other people make this mistake too. And that's actually what led me to start Ascend, because I was like, I want to create this leadership program that actually talks about these practical skills that we never talk about, but you need to know. And so 100% agree with you that I think rejection is just part of the game, and we can grow so much from it and can be such transformational and like pivotal for like our careers. And
It
so
seeded your whole business idea. Like it's the whole reason we're here.
yeah, exactly.
Great.
I shared with all of you, I moved into leadership by making a ton of mistakes, AKA a ton of failures. And that's what led me to start this. And so to all of you, if you had a mistake recently, just like taking Danny's examples, my experiences, like just see what you can learn from them and recognize that there will always be a new door that opens coming out of it.
Yeah. I have a good quote. I've never heard the quote directly, but Jay Simons, who was president of Atlassian until recently, told us about how the co-CEOs of Atlassian interpret the stock price. This is right after, it was either right before or right after Slack was going public. And it was something along the lines of like, we don't celebrate when the stock price is high because that would mean that we have to beat ourselves up when the stock price is low. And so that's kind of how I think about success and failure. Like, let's say, sales org I'm overseeing is just doing incredibly well. I don't really get to take credit for that, because that means in moments where we dip and times are hard, I don't really want to beat myself up. I want to be reflective, but I don't think that's a failure per se, or it's something that is exclusively attributable to me. So like, it's back to, I think I was talking about this earlier, like sometimes we feel like the world revolves around us and we are fundamentally attached to each thing. It's really nice as our careers progress to actually separate that a little bit and say, I don't get much credit for that success because I'm selling Slack and this is a really lovable product and the market dynamics are in our favor and all sorts of stuff. Or, or an org is stalling for whatever reason. there's lots of external and there's lots of internal reasons that that's happening. And I actually don't get too bummed out about that either.
Yeah, that's great. I love that that quote that you just shared. So let's take some questions from everyone joining in. So the first question is, did you have a mentor or mentors earlier in your career? If so, how did you find them? And also, how do you continue to have mentors?
Um, Early in my career, I had people I admired and people I went to for advice consistently. I never called them a mentor. I don't know if I even knew that concept per se. So there was no like, me writing Shivani a cold email saying, "Will you be my mentor?" We've never met. Um, but I think that relationship evolved just as I watched how people operate and I admired them on different dimensions. And my approach is usually like if I admire something, make sure once I'm recognizing it that I tell the person at some point, say, I don't know if you know this, but I'm literally trying to put on your persona when I make this decision or where I handle this type of conversation. And that way I'm mentored on what it looks like to be a really good friend. When I see another friend, just be really loyal or really thoughtful or send a handwritten card for no reason. And I mentored on how to be a good colleague or employee based on um, based on how other people operate. So like this is probably an unexpected one that I've never shared before. But my mom passed away while I worked at HubSpot, and I used to be obsessed with my quota and the numbers and black and white metrics of success that showed Danny's winning. And after that, I talked about living your eulogy versus your resume earlier. Um, After that, I was really reflective and I was like, who do I want to work around? Like, who's a good person? Who do I spend a lot of time laughing with in one on ones? Who always does the right thing long term rather than the short term good thing? And, there was someone who I didn't necessarily admire him professionally. I didn't think he was a genius. I didn't think he was the best seller, but I so admired the way that he carries himself and the way he makes work fun for people that I came to him soon after that and told him like that was a version of mentorship for me in that moment of I really like how you show up and this is one of the things I want to emulate that I don't think I've put enough emphasis on. So that's that's part one of the answer. I guess part two, do I have mentors now? Since then, in my career, I have people who slightly more formally mentor me. I mean, there's definitely people who I call for advice who know my strengths and my blind spots, and so they can call me out on whether I'm making a good decision and how to approach something. I would say HubSpot CEO is absolutely one of those. I have a professor from business school, two professors from business school who have played that role for me, and I cited one example of one who's not even an ongoing mentor, Irv Grosbeck, but he's like this sage man in his 80s who's lived a lot of life. And he's the one who had suggested that I approach meetings without asking for anything. So lots of people collected as an overall life advisory board.
Thank you for sharing that. Sorry about your mom. And thanks for sharing this like really practical tips about the mentorship. Like you don't have to wait until someone reaches out to you to be to be your mentor. You can just start embodying what you're seeing from them and build that relationship that way.
Yeah.
So speaking of like continue on the theme of like mentors or senior leaders, one of the questions from the chat is, do you have any tips on how to start building a relationship with people who are more senior than you? Especially, maybe I can add a little twist to that, like, especially in this remote world where that's getting even harder, building relationships with people that you already don't know well. Like, what advice would you have for us to build relationships with people who are more senior than us?
It's a good question because you do want to be respectful of other people's time. Like, let's say you want to build a relationship with the CEO of your company and you work at a 3,000 person company. If every single person wanted a 30-minute coffee with that person, that wouldn't scale. So you do have to think about it. Um, the best approach is when you have some way that you can add value and some way you can make their day more pleasant. So I don't think you should butter anyone up or fake it at all. But if you've observed, let's say someone is way more senior than you, not just like one level or one step above you, if you really appreciate something you've observed about how they handled themselves in an all hands or a strategic decision they made, or particularly like a hard, bold bet they made, I would probably DM that person in Slack, or, I'd find an opportunity when maybe you're in a meeting with them for whatever reason, you can private Zoom chat them and say, like, that was really well said. That stood out. And then you have content for your follow up, which is like, this stood out. I'm trying to do more of that. Is there a world I can talk to you about it? Whether you know it or not, you've kind of been mentoring me from afar, or like I've admired you from afar in the least creepy way possible. So that's one way to do it. Um, the other is, make yourself an obvious contender for working on strategic projects by thinking about how to go above and beyond in your day job. Um, and so, like, if you do something that is good for your org or the company, and good for someone beyond you, it will be helpful and it will get recognized. Will the CEO notice it right away? Maybe not, but it's kind of it's a topical excuse to build a relationship with someone, and it comes from you putting in the work first. So that would be another tactic I would suggest.
Yeah, these are really great practical tips, as all the tips that you've been sharing right now.
Good.
And I think one thing I just add to that is, when you put yourself out there, when you message that person, most of the time people are going to be really happy to receive those messages. And you're never going to know how they're going to respond unless you try. You always miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. Famous office line, my favorite, and other people have gotten credit for it too. So that is something like, if you're trying to build relationships, like put yourself in these kind of situations, and no one's going to create those situations for you. You have to do it yourself.
Amen. I have written those emails. So a mentor, friend, amazing woman, Anne Raimundi, who's met a lot of people at Slack, because I've brought her in there to speak to a number of groups. I got to know her while I was planning a conference with her for female entrepreneurs, but we weren't like, we were kind of we were working on the task at hand. I sent her an email summer in between my 2 years at business school that was 100% genuine, and said, like, you're my career hero. Here's the why behind it. Yeah. Variety, how you've approached the career, the companies you've chosen, what I've learned about your approach. Would you ever want to have lunch? She came to me at Airbnb to have lunch. So, like, talk about humility on her end. She left her office, came to me. We built a really strong relationship. I can call her for all sorts of advice all the time. And it all kind of comes full circle. She became an executive at one of my husband's portfolio companies. Like, I don't know. It all started basically with like a really genuine email where I told her all the reasons I admire her, and then it turned into a beautiful friendship.
Wow, that's amazing. That's
Yeah.
really good.
Yeah.
And so, being mindful of time, last question for you. What's a piece of career advice that you want to share with us before we wrap up?
Um, the one that feels top of mind right now is and I'm reminding myself this all of the time, especially as I step into a new role. Asking for help is a sign of strength, not a sign of weakness. So do it often, do it genuinely, and express gratitude when you receive the help, and make sure you're paying it forward. So there's definitely an element of karma in there. We actually had a prompt at some point actually, here's what happened. We brought in Brene Brown, who has this amazing TED talk on vulnerability and books and, all sorts of great content. We brought her in for a senior leadership group retreat. One of our takeaways was around the strength of asking for help. Then we literally had a prompt for every single person to post in Slack, who did I ask for help from? And how did it go? And so, like, I've now learned to fundamentally think of that as a way to lead, whether you're in a management role or not. And I'm really proud of all. I want all the help. Like, I have an executive coach. I'm into therapy for help. I'm into asking peers. I've sat down with people on my team and taken notes for an hour to understand how they lead, because I think they have they have certain fundamentals that I just don't have that I want to learn from. So I'm always asking for help. And I really encourage you guys to think of that as a sign of confidence and leadership rather than weakness. And I think this is also really genuinely the appropriate time to think about Ascend as one area or one way to do that. Like, from what I know about Ascend, um, this is certainly something I would participate in now. And it's something that I wish I had access to even sooner, when I had even more, like voices in my head asking myself whether I'm screwing it up or not. But it's for aspiring leaders and managers who want to learn frameworks and develop skills. And it's a way to invest in yourself so that you can be a better leader for others. And Shivani is amazing. So find the right approach for you, whether it's a program, whether it's a coach, whether it's setting a reminder for yourself every week, who have I asked for help from. But that's like my big career advice.
Wow, I love that. And I did not expect you sharing about Ascend. So thank you for that.
I mean it. I do.
Thank you so much. That means so much to me. So thank you. And, as we're wrapping up, I would love to hear, like, what are the takeaways that all of you have from this chat? Like, I have goosebumps right now. There's like so many good things, so many good takeaways, so many good nuggets. So throw it in the chat. Like, what's a takeaway that you have from our conversation today? That asking for help is really resonating. But, we've been talking about imposter syndrome. How do you build relationships with your team, balancing likability versus directness, growing as a mom, failure, rejection, live your eulogy, not your resume. Love that. Do the job that's not
that one, by the way. Okay, that's not a Dannie quote. That's a David Brooks quote. So David Brooks, as many of you probably know, is a columnist for the New York Times. He has a TED Talk, and he has a lot of articles that help along these lines. And I think of as guides for how I parent. Like, what am I positively reinforcing? Straight A's or being a kind person? So he has this amazing TED Talk that I suggest called "Should You Live Your Resume or Your Eulogy?"
Got it. Cool. I will check that out. These are so good. Providing value and letting your mentors know that you value them. Embracing past failures, learning to transform for better. Love the suggestions to get out of your head and do something to help others. I agree. That one really resonated too, Christina. This is great. Thank you so much again, Dannie, for joining us. And honestly, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for being so open with us. I think these honest conversations help all of us. And I really, really appreciate you spending your time with us here.
Thank you for hosting me. I was really honored when you sent me the note. And you guys, like, look, Shivani and I basically met on a blind date. I had a former colleague from HubSpot say, I think you two would really like each other. And then we met up for coffee, connected, and here we are. So, I don't know, what's our lesson to my lesson to impart here is, like, say yes to the random setup if someone suggests that you should meet someone else who they think is great, because you never regret it.
Yeah, definitely. And, and what I was talking about earlier, like, just like reach out to people or like ask, because you never know. Like, when I reached out to Dannie to join this Fireside chat, I was like, oh, I don't know if she'll say yes or not. I was like, okay, let me just ask her. Worst case scenario, she says no, and we move on.
I'm like, me or sorry.
Exactly. So like we both just got into our own heads, like where I was like, oh, is she going to be able to join? And Dannie's like, wow, it sounds like you were like surprised that I was asking you. So another good example of just like get out of your head and just go do it.
Totally. Thank you, Shivani.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you to all of you for joining us. This has been great. I've loved the energy and all the takeaways in the chat. And, as Dannie mentioned, like if you really found this chat helpful, and if you want to develop these skills that we've been talking about, and if you want to do it with a community of women who are like you, then I would love to work with you in Ascend's leadership program. Our next program starts on March 1st. And we're accepting applications now. We just dropped the link in the chat so you can apply, and in it, just add that you attended our Fireside chat and we'll fast track your application. We'll send out the recording for this later today so you can go back and rewatch it. I know I definitely will. I have so many good takeaways that I need to go write down and just like remind myself to live. And so I look forward to seeing all of you again soon. I hope everyone takes care and stays well. And thank you so much for joining us. This has been truly incredible.
Thank you. Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New Year. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.